Hey, SWAT. Welcome to the August issue of your VMSA SITREP. Now we are here at the DS&J PPMD offsite with a couple of great guests and a couple of great stories. Chris Oberdahl, Diane Ashley, both West Point graduates, took different paths at that point. Both PPMDs, wildly successful. Chris is the fairly new LCSP for Cyber Intel. Now, they had really interesting. Diane cross-commissioned Win Air Force.
Yep.
But I think what would be most interesting that I hope they'll share is their path and their journey to, as still relatively new in that evolution of being females cadets at the United States Military Academy. Chris, talk us through your experience and what brought you.
What took me to the academy?
That's right.
Well, interestingly enough, my mom joined the Air Force in the 70s, which was fantastic.
True pioneer.
So, yep, she was an NCO in the Air Force. So, through the exposure of watching her, I knew I wanted to be in the military. I wanted something a little harder than Air Force. No, but I'd read in our history books, I'd read about West Point and thought, oh my God, that's what an incredible institution. I'll never get in there. And they reached out and wanted me to apply. I hit it. My dad found it. We went to the orientation. The rest was history. But it was just, I knew I wanted to serve and I wanted to go to college, and it was a great way to put both of it together. So I picked up from San Diego, moved across the nation sight unseen to New York. We call it upstate New York. Upstate New Yorkers say it's not upstate New York, but moved to New York, and the rest is history.
You were an athlete.
D1 swimmer the first year.
You were a D1 swimmer the first year. So you walked in and had that kind of piece of the puzzle.
Yep.
And you all educated me last night that it's, at that time, roughly 10% of your class?
I was 10%. What were you?
Yeah, about 10, maybe 11.
Yeah.
Diane, you grew up in Georgia.
I did. Oh, good memory.
And were brilliant valedictorian in your high school
Yes.
class.
And not an
Sure,
athlete.
but not an athlete.
Not an athlete.
And you kind of stumbled upon this academy thing.
Yeah. I wanted something super hard. I don't know why. You know, we're dumb when we're 17 and 18. We're making these choices. I wanted the hardest thing I could get. And there was a woman a class year ahead of me, which is Chris's class. And she got to the auditorium where they announced the scholarships for all the graduating seniors.
$500 for this.
500 this, 1,000 for this. And at the very end, they say $250,000. And I went, what did they just say?
In value.
And so all of a sudden my head was turned because I knew my parents couldn't afford it. And I had to get some sort of scholarship. And I said, well, this sounds like a good idea. You know, the young 17, 18-year-old brain.
Zero history, zero connection to the play.
And I said, maybe I should start doing some push-ups.
Now, you both shared the experience. Tell me if I'm being dramatic, but I think helped shape the person you become. You share you had a kind of a coded language that allowed you to finish each other's sentences. And do you feel like it informs in some level, the work you do today?
I think so. I mean, here's the thing. So Chris and I were 1 year apart at West Point, but we didn't know each other there. Pretty sure she hazed me. I'm almost convinced. And we reconnected several years ago, and then really got to know each other here at Deloitte about 4 years ago. It is like there's no daylight in our friendship, and we feel like we've known each other for 30 years.
That is not that different, though. I would say,
Yeah.
like, from what
Yeah.
you've experienced, you know, being in the military, if you're submariners, if you're aviators, like that common shared suffering, common experiences. So I don't want to like over highlight too much. Like, oh, sure, it was a little bit harder for when you're a smaller group, but it's when you're of a same group and like minds, you'll start to, you know, there is some of that reduction in that daylight, like you talked about. So I think that's what made it different. And like anything, to answer your question, when you go through anything that's really, really hard and tests your mental and physical edge, that's always going to make you better in anything you do. So I think a big part of, I used to always joke, I thought the academy trained me for kids, most importantly, it's sort of like the hardest job I have. But I think it's obviously going to make you better in industry, being a parent, all that kind of stuff, right? Because you get pushed to the absolute limit where you're like, I don't think I have another step to give, and miraculously you have one, right? So.
I know that you all serve as mentors to a lot of vets around the firm. You're going to get introduced to a lot of new folks with this video. I know y'all enough to know that you're comfortable. Folks reach out to you and ask for your unique insight as they try to navigate their way through the firm from their vet transition experience.
Absolutely. I get involved with the veteran community. I help with some of the Hire Our Heroes. You know, Juan, you set such a great example of always saying, anytime, any day, hit me up. We're here as a community together. And it's so true. And it's easy to connect and speak a different language and then bring us all back into where we're working and the missions that we're serving now. It's amazing.
I appreciate you both. Now, you both were very candid, perhaps a little fueled by the events of last night. But you were candid enough to kind of bare your soul and say that the lone regret you really had was maybe not going Navy.
No.
No,
No.
Somehow, for as much as you think I don't remember last night, I definitely remember never saying those
Never
words.
said that. Never said
no,
that.
but thank you.
Yeah.
Diane and Chris, congrats on an awesome career, on being great role models and mentors to all the vet community in this firm. Thanks for your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, Mom.
Fly Navy. Thanks.
Be Navy.